G'day. Now, this is going to be a two-part explainer video. There are major problems with the traditional methods and approaches, and I want to highlight those and explain why they're problems and why ultimately they fail people. They don't really qualify as genuine meditation, and these are universally accepted techniques and universally accepted outcomes. So that's the first part. And the second part, second half, is going to be a long video. I'm going to explain what real meditation is. Okay, so let me just kick it off with this really dodgy video that I've made using AI generated video. It's very hard to get it to do what you want it to do, but the point of the video is there's a fairly a lot of people experience this. It's not an easily had experience, but seeing this internal light. It's of the more esoteric experiences, it's one of the more common. And the video is really to give you some idea of how startling the experience is. It's um, it's a very poor approximation. The experience itself is internal. You don't see any light outside, and the body doesn't light up. It's all an internal mind created experience. Now, what this experience, when this experience occurs, it occurs as part of one-pointedness. There's a, um, uh, well, to quote Theravada Buddhism, they've done a lot of work on this. They're very hyped up about jhanas. Okay, so this experience of light occurs in the higher jhanas. Okay, so what I thought I'd do is run through an explanation of what jhanas actually are and strip away some of the uh, terminology and arbitrary sort of designations and all the rest of it. Okay, now the first four in Theravada Buddhism, they've got 8 jhanas that they 4 external and 4 internal, and ranging in degrees of subtlety. Okay, now an early jhana, many people experiencing practicing meditation will have experienced this. One of the earliest jhanas is when you're sitting probably in an uncomfortable cross-legged position on the floor, on a cushion or something like that, and quite um, suddenly, all the body sensation disappears. It suddenly becomes quite effortless to sit there. Um, and then there's you get oh, this is nice, and there's a bit of euphoria when that happens. That's one of the very early jhanas. It's now what's going on. It has to do with the technique. Uh, the first stages of meditation is to achieve this one-pointed state. Now that's common across most of the traditions in one form or another. The techniques vary, the belief structures vary, but what people are actually doing is pretty much the same thing across many of the traditions. I mean, there are lots of outliers, and I'm going to run through those a bit later in the video. But uh, to use a technique which I think many people now are very familiar with as a way of explaining what I'm trying to say, you've got these Vipassana courses, 10-day courses, and there's the first 3 days or so is done usually. The person's asked to pay attention to the touch of the air at the entrance of the nostrils as the air passes in and out. It makes a slight uh, brushing sensation, and that becomes the focus point for your attention. Now, there are initially if you're new to a practice like that, you find all kinds of things get in the way. Physical discomfort is one of them. Mental reverie, mind's chattering away and can't stop it. Attention wanders all the time. This is how it starts for most people. So what you're doing there, you're attempting to discipline your attention span. The brain's natural function, you've got the five senses, right? And it's constantly receiving data, information from the five senses, and it's also doing a lot of work monitoring the internal state of the body. Like it keeps the heart going, digestion's working, blood pressure's working, kidneys are functioning, the liver's working. All of that's not autonomous. The brain's in control of that in various levels, through the various nervous parts of the nervous system and all the rest of it. The brain has an ultimate responsibility in that. It's working all the time. So you're imposing this discipline upon yourself, and you're essentially telling the brain, well, stop consciously registering information. You're saying, I just want to have my attention on this touch of the air, this tiny little spot. That's all I want to do. So ignore everything else, and just give me this ability to keep my mind focused. Okay, so you're imposing this discipline, and you persist at it, and you start to succeed. And little by little, you stop consciously paying attention to all the sense data that's coming in. Now, one of the first things that tends to switch off is body sensation. You're sitting there, you're making an effort, you're feeling discomfort, and then suddenly, all that discomfort's gone. It's comfortable. I'm sitting comfortably. Well, that's the first jhana, and essentially what the jhanas are is progressive um, disciplining of the brain's function, and you're switching off its conscious activity of noticing. I mean, it's continuing to notice. It doesn't stop. It's just what it presents consciously. Now, that's one of the early jhanas. And another one that I think many people practicing will have experienced, the internal reverie that you're struggling against, that switches off, turns itself off. And you sit there, you've got this quiet, pleasant state that you're sitting calmly and you're not in discomfort. You're feeling good because it brings a nice sort of euphoria with it. And the euphoria tends to drop away as well. But all of a sudden, the chatter stops, just stops. Oh, now that's another jhana. That's somewhere in the first four, higher up the list. Now, the process then continues. This one-pointed technique, as I say, you're disciplining yourself to not pay attention consciously to stuff around you. Well, there comes a point where you stop paying attention to some of the external senses. And the next one to drop away is vision. Right? You become very internally focused, and you cease paying attention to your internal vision. But this is where this video comes in. That can be replaced by a light, an internal light. Now, okay, a quick edit. In the next few minutes, I refer to the pituitary gland. Well, I'm making a big blunder there. I should be saying pineal gland. Now, I'm a bit of a lazy bugger. I didn't want to redo the whole video. So bear with me a little bit, please. Give me a bit of slack. I'm saying pituitary, but that's wrong. It's pineal gland. Okay, back to the video. Sorry about the interruption. there's a good possibility that the physiological reason for this is that the pituitary gland, which is deep inside the brain, the human brain, it's light sensitive. In creatures like frogs and some species of frogs and some of the lower invertebrates, the pituitary gland is actually on the surface of the skull and it's light sensitive. It reacts to sunlight, daylight, darkness. Right? It registers light. Uh, Quite possibly very early creatures before they developed vision needed to at least sense when it was dark or bright, and the pituitary appears to have that capacity. Now, in the human brain, there's all kinds of later developments, frontal lobes, and the brain's grown up around the pituitary. But the pituitary, is well known, still retains its capacity to perceive light or register light. So you've instructed yourself to stop paying attention to things, and you're using this vehicle of forcing your attention onto a specific thing over and over. Now the brain, um, it's got this constant stream of data of its senses. It's constantly registering the senses, and its job is to make sense of the information that it's receiving and create an internal model of the reality that you're in. So in the absence of receiving the visual data, it doesn't stop working. And there's a good argument to be made that it starts to register consciously stimulation of the pituitary. And the pituitary, the signal it gives out is, oh, there's light. So you can have this internal experience of light. And when that occurs in different traditions um, uh, deal with it differently. But in some versions of Theravada Buddhism, when a person successfully starts to see this light, that becomes their meditation, chosen meditation object. You cease using the breath or rise and fall of the stomach or whatever it might be, and you use the experience, the internal light, as your meditation object and focus all your efforts on that. Now, there are 4 levels of this light appears in what's known as the higher jhanas, the 4 jhanas, higher up. Now, the once again, there's qualitative differences in the nature of the experience of this light. Whether or not you're artificially, stimulating the pituitary with the exercise you're doing, that I don't have an opinion on. But the quality of the perception of the light changes. Now, in what would, let's arbitrarily call it the 5th jhana, and you start to see this light, and it's preceded experiencing, seeing this light. Frequently, people get this impression of there's some kind of light that they're perceiving just above their eyebrows, or coming from above down, and it's a yellowish sort of light frequently. And in let's say 5th jhana, just to be a bit arbitrary. The Buddhists are very specific about, they've got all these, infinite perception of infinite space is one. The highest one is neither perception nor non-perception, which I'm going to come to in a second. Okay, but in these lower zones, you still do have some registering of the other senses. Okay, you've lost, you're no longer concerned with the body um, uh, feelings, sensation state, though you feel it's not giving you any discomfort. The internal reverie has stopped. Your hearing is still active, and you're still aware of your surroundings in the early stages of this, but that then also drops away as well, and you progressively become more and more mentally absorbed in experiencing this light, to the point and this is the highest state that this particular process goes to. The final state is there's just this light. Prior to that, you're conscious of yourself experiencing the light. You see a difference between yourself and the light. And that's probably that's their infinite space one. But ultimately, you do become fully absorbed in just noticing this light, and there's no observer. There's just there's just the light. You're thoroughly mentally immersed in it. Now that's as far as one-pointed meditation practice goes. That's it. That's you're absorbed in a single experience, which is constantly recurring and it doesn't change. It's just that same experience constantly. No wavering of the mind. Now, here's where the problem is. The context in which you've had that experience has been that you've trotted off to some meditation retreat run by a Buddhist organisation, probably, but it doesn't have to be. It can be some, plenty of other traditions report these kinds of experiences. So there's a meaning attached to this experience. Oh, you're making progress. Oh, it's very well done. You're confirming the philosophy that has been fed to you or that you've um, been listening to. And it's a very stark experience. So the first time it happens to you, it's very impressive. And that's what I tried to convey in that pretty crappy video, just how startling it can be. So in the context of the preconceptions that you've taken on board, you again get this very, very impressive experience. And it's then naturally you interpret it as meaning something. And this is one of the real traps of these techniques because it doesn't mean anything. It's just, it's a physiological feedback of some description, probably involving a brain, a gland in the brain, which is pumping out whatever secretions it does. And the brain, when it receives stimulus from the senses, it produces images, among other things, thoughts and images. That's its job. And you starve it of its normal feed of information. Well, it doesn't stop trying to interpret in some form what information it is getting. And if it's getting information from the pituitary, which is a light-sensitive organ, it's going to demonstrate light. That's the image the mind's going to produce for you. It doesn't mean anything, but people believe that it does. Now, there's a stage beyond the one-pointed meditation, which once again a few people experience. Some people master the trick of being able to get into it as an act of will, and this is this um, uh, Nirodha state, which is a trance state, so a suspended animation state in its most extreme form. Well, once again, you've got these interpretations put to it, and well, might be a Buddha, No, rubbish. This Nirodha state, once again, it's a reflex action, and it has to do with the survival instinct. It's a reaction to stress, basically, or danger. There have been examples numerous examples. People buried under rubble, um, you know, buried and unable to breathe, and dug out sometimes days later, and they revive. That's because there's this last-ditch survival mechanism uh, that, in the absence of being able to save yourself, you're relying on being rescued. And this suspended animation state is that. It's a um, uh, people can go into it spontaneously. Uh, uh, some people under extreme stress faint. Well, it's because their body is protecting them from the stress that they're experiencing. It's a part of innate survival capacity. Uh, and the fact that it comes about through some of these meditation practices, um, there are some people that, as I say, they master the trick. They can voluntarily go into it. Uh, Mostly, people who experience this, they sort of fall into it. They go through the one-pointed process. Uh, uh, they may, um, prior to that, experience all kinds of internal imagery, which once again, the brain is receiving stimulus, internal body stimulus, and it's creating images. That's the brain's job, is to make sense of the stimulus that it receives, present that as conscious experience. So they might be experiencing all kinds of internal hallucinations. They they might have the impression that they're out of their body and looking at it, from outside. Um, that's an internal image generated by the stimulus that the brain is receiving. Right? And some of these meditation techniques, they actually do generate a great deal of internal stress. You think about it. In order to maintain your attention, fix your attention. Well, you engage in a struggle with yourself. It doesn't come easily. You've got to discipline yourself into it. And there can be all kinds of internal stress you generate doing that. Take it far enough, the body might say, okay, where's the kill switch here? I mean, the body's can't take any more of this, switch it off. And they fall into this neurotic state. And I think that's people experience motor vehicle accidents. They black out. It's the same thing. The fact that it occurs in the context of a meditation practice, a meaning is attached to it. Now, what I'm trying to convey in this particular video is that there are all these belief structures attached to these experiences. And it's a massive, massive dead end as far as meditation is concerned. They're interesting experiences, but all you're doing is researching the limits of consciousness, the brain's capacity to maintain conscious awareness. That's really all it is. There's nothing else in there. You know? Now, what is inspiring this particular video? I'm kind of I find it very tedious. There's lots and lots and lots now of um, people um, providing interviews with well-regarded meditation practitioners in these various traditions. And I can't see that they've really made real progress at all. Um, they're, these people are self-absorbed, very self-absorbed. And the trouble with these experiences when they occur, when they manufacture them, and there's a whole variety of things that they can get involved in. And, with a great deal of effort, they put a lot of effort into it and they get rewarded with these experiences. But it has an unfortunate result of magnifying their vanity, magnifying their self-importance. Um, that's not that's not insight. It's not spiritual growth. There's um, a very infantile psychology that uh, we naturally enough we just stayed in a womb and all we know is ourselves. Then we're born, and as a human being, our development actually takes many years. The human brain doesn't finish its growth and development stage to your early 20s. You're still developing, right? Now, psychologically, in the earliest part of your life, you are the center of the universe, psychologically. Everything relates to you. Everything's done for you. You can't feed yourself. You can't fend for yourself. Everything's the center. And it's only as you grow uh, older and start interacting with others that you start to recognize that there are others who are as real as you are. But there's a psychological shift required for that to actually become a reality. And a lot of people actually never make that shift completely. Um, Other people don't actually enjoy the same level of reality that a person with an infantile psychology uh, holds for themselves. The person who is still in that infantile state, they're more real, psychologically speaking, than anyone or anything else. They are still the center of the universe. And it's a phase of human development that you hatch out of that shell. Now, the unfortunate side effect of these particular experiences in meditation, in the context that a person is seeking some kind of, quote, air quotes, spiritual growth, these things are held up as signposts of you actually succeeding. And it's a massive self-delusion. And whole traditions, whole meditation traditions are based on experiencing these things and being confirmed in the belief. Um, there are other more exotic practices. Uh, One of the ones that I find very very hard to settle with is the Tibetan Kala Chakra practice. Now, it's been a long time since I rubbed shoulders with any practitioners like that, but and I might have just been unlucky. But every individual that I met like that, they were some of the most unpleasant people I've ever come across. Um, um, uh, deeply conceited, um, uh, unable to engage in any kind of normal human reciprocity. Now, they've gone to extraordinary effort. Essentially, this Kala Chakra practice, using a mandala to envision a perfect world and enter through all the various challenges to get to the center of it, where is residing the deity, and psychologically you become that deity. All that they're doing, it's very impressive what they're doing, but all it is um, mastering lucid dreaming while remaining awake. That's that's what all it boils down to. But it's not a simple feat. It's quite marvellous what they achieve. But all it does is confirm their self-importance. And uh, the reward is, frankly, these people go insane. They lose the ability to actually interact in a human way. But you know, they're happy, I think. There are a range of practices. Some things I think are pretty good. I mean, um, I would I think that some of the physical practices of yoga and tai chi and qigong, there's some obvious benefits there. Uh, in yoga, we've got another difficulty which has become pretty common to do with Kundalini. Now, that's another physiological thing. Now, one thing about yoga, well, it's the definition, union. I mean, that's given this religious overtone of union with the divine spirit and things like that. Yeah, there's another way to interpret what the word yoga means, and that's integration. Now, there is a Kundalini experience. There's no doubt about that. Well, you might have a doubt about it. I don't. There's various nervous systems in the body, and there do seem to be subtle pathways which are not the same as the nerves, connected nerves, from the spinal column outwards and from the brain downwards, and all the rest of it. There seems to be some other pathway that allows electrical energy to circulate in the body. And this Kundalini experience, um, when it's a controlled experience, I mean, a lot of people feel energy in their body, and once again, it's like this seeing a bright light. They get very self-impressed by it, and psychologically, they start going a bit weird. Okay, but there does seem to be um, a process by which some kind of unification of the various energy pathways, some kind of integration is possible. Now, uh, that's a different order of experience, but again, there are these, because it's such a vivid experience when it occurs, if it occurs, and very few people, I think, actually experience it. But it's a very vivid experience, and it happens in the context, usually, of doing some spiritual practice. Well, it must mean something. That's the conclusion people jump to. Oh, it's got to be something really special. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily at all. It can be just another physiological phenomenon which is not well understood yet by medical science or Asian experimentation. It exists. Quite what it is and what its function might be, I don't think has been really settled clearly. And people jumped into the conclusion, oh, well, I've achieved something. It's very often that these people are still immersed, thoroughly immersed in this infantile psychology. And all of these meditation experiences do very little to help a person move beyond that. Now, there is, I think, a real value to meditation. Uh, the reality, the reality that we live in, and is a starting point for just about everybody, is we come out of some kind of inharmonious turmoil, and it's been our life. And um, if a person says to themselves, well, I might try meditation, I might see if I can understand myself better, understand the world better. And there is a simple way to go about it. Now, a genuine meditation technique, something which is really useful. It's not something you're going to do. You're not going to try and force yourself to do something. You're not going to try and make something happen. A genuine meditation technique is one which facilitates, creates the circumstances in which a genuine understanding of yourself can arise. Right? Now, in recent years in psychology, there's been a segment of that of psychology that's come to understand that the mind and the body, the brain and the body, the mind, is not a separate thing. It's all one thing. It's a false dichotomy to say there's the mind and the body. There's no separation. It's all one thing. And so it's the subconscious stresses that build up in a life that's difficult are stored as unresolved physical tension. And the simple approach to self-awareness and self-understanding is to address the symptoms as the key to getting to the heart of what's going on internally with yourself. In other words, relaxing. Relax the relax the tension. And with that, the internal issues will become more conscious. Now that's creating the circumstances for um, self-awareness and self-understanding to occur. Now, I think by way of explaining quite what I'm trying to get across to you, I'm going to use Hollywood as the means. Now, these days, if you notice the sorts of movies that Hollywood's making its fortunes on, it's Marvel comics and superheroes. And there's a very good psychological reason why the crowds flock to that and they've made so much money out of it, is we're living in a time of great fear. Um, young kids, or young people today, uh, uh, the overwhelming narrative is we've got a climate crisis, and their psychological reaction is, oh, don't worry about the future because there isn't one. Right? And there's this recurring fear now of nuclear war. Well, this is very frightening. And people psychologically compensate, and they compensate through fantasy. And Hollywood thrives on pandering to fantasy. And so the superhero movies are doing well because it's addressing the survival instinct. Oh, if only I had a superpower, I could not only could I do something about it, but I'd be safe. Right? That's the psychological driver in our society these days, and it's demonstrated by the resort to fantasy. Now, in the 50s and the 40s, Hollywood made its movie out of love stories. The classic boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl again, and they live happily ever after. Because the yearnings of the people living in those less terrifying times were more suburban. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have constant news flow of all the world's problems being thrust in their face. And the natural yearning to find love and be loved was the fantasy that Hollywood satisfied and made its money on then. People love fantasy. And these meditation traditions that I'm busy criticizing here, well, they're doing the same thing. That you can escape this world. There's a better world. You can be enlightened. You can have all these wonderful experiences and go off into some kind of fantasy world where it's all beautiful. It's all heaven-like, or it's higher realms. Well, this is a compensation that people are giving to themselves in the absence of knowing what else to do. Uh, the other big phenomenon which has emerged in the last dozen or so years are these internet influences. And that's the same thing packaged up differently. You've got these people who live this very public fantasy life of every day is perfect, every day is wonderful, you know. It's happy, happy, happy every day. And they reap in millions of dollars and gather millions of followers because all these people are desperate for some kind of fantasy. And here's an individual, or there's many of them now, who apparently has proven that it's not a fantasy. It can actually be done. And they gravitate to that because this person is the living proof the fantasy is real. And when you know what life's really like behind the camera for these people, um, they've got their demons. It's a game, right? Now, this is the psychology that we most of us start out with in our early life because things are terrifying at the moment, and things can be painful. A lot of people are suffering in wars. Some people suffer dreadful accidents. Some people have terrible. Um, most of us, very, very lucky. Most of us don't have good childhoods. We're born to parents who've got their issues, their problems, and we're just another problem. They might love us dearly, but they don't necessarily handle parenting very well, and we get burdened with all kinds of things. We get burdened with our parents' hatreds, our grandparents' hatreds. So we don't talk to those sorts of people. I mean, there are places in the world where if you're born in one culture and you're too close to another culture, you might find life's constantly in danger if you don't watch out. Um, People are taught these things. Now, true meditation, given that's the starting point, this is how people start out with all these difficulties and confusions and infantile psychology. That's how we start. And you want to see into that, understand it, and also develop further away from that into something bigger and better. Well, in a genuine meditation practice, there's a very long period for most people, which you have to say is a therapeutic stage. Um, there are lots of things that you need to discover and be consciously aware of. Uh, the culture that you're born in. It's just an accident of birth. The language you speak, the things you believe, um, the habits that you're supposed to live by. They're very arbitrary. You be born in a region only a few hundred kilometres away, and you speak a different language. You have a different religion. You think different things. You've got different requirements made of you. Now, these are all social conditionings, and that's the light stuff. The heavy stuff is, maybe you've been abused as a child or neglected, or grown up in a war zone. There's all kinds of things that may have stressed you and you've grown up with these stresses, and because you grow up with them, you're actually not particularly consciously aware of them, but you will see them in your body. Um, how many people do you see walking around, their shoulders are hunched, and they don't relax, or they stoop, or whatever, or they're uncoordinated in their movement, gainly. Um, why? These are the tensions that the body has stored, because the mind and the body are not a separate thing, they're one thing. And the subconscious reservoir of unresolved issues, physical tension, and it doesn't have to be tight muscles, it could be internal tensions. They can be quite subtle stuff, and manifest as stomach issues or blood pressure, or uh, it can manifest as obsessions. Um, People, there are some people who, they've grown up absolutely starved for affection, and they become obsessive about sex because they get a semblance of intimacy, gentleness, which they're starved for, happens in sex. Um, there are all these confounding complications, and this is how we start. If you approach a meditation practice, you start all, you know, you're all fucked up usually, and this is how you start. And these meditation traditions, they're no help at all. They're going to just impose their delusions onto you. There's more stuff to deal with. So the first stage, and it's quite a long stage, is this simply becoming aware of how you've been conditioned as an individual. Um, you've got a value system, but why do you have that value system? And do you actually agree with it? You have all these different attitudes. Well, where did you get those attitudes from? And what do you think as opposed to what you've been told to think? Now, this is a very long process, but it's a process of self-awareness. And if there are adverse complications in your psychology, which are a lifelong difficulty, the first stage of actually being able to do something about it is to become aware of them, to be able to consciously contemplate what your actual condition is. And you don't need a meditation technique to do that. You just need to create the circumstances in which that understanding will gradually emerge. And relaxing is how it's done, because that's the symptom. The symptom of all the problems you have is the internal stress, which is usually unconsciously, you're not conscious of it. It's unconsciously held within you. And to bring that into conscious awareness is a way to start to comprehend your condition and see how things connect. A lot of self-understanding, we're still talking about the therapeutic phase of meditation. It's more about seeing how things relate to each other in your own mind, the relationships which exist between the various concepts that you have about what's real, what's right, what's wrong, what your values are, where you get them from, why. Why did your parents say you had to do such and such? Why does society say that this is right, that's wrong? All these things. Uh, to see the relationships between things and to see them consciously uh, is a reliable pathway to begin to understand yourself. And it has a name, it's called free association. Now, here's a major contrast between, say, practicing these traditional one-pointed techniques and that. You're actively suppressing thought with these one-pointed techniques. You're actively striving to cease the activity of the mind in order to gain this one-pointed experience. Um, whereas what's actually useful, okay, you've got a head full of reverie and repetitive thinking and all the rest of it, is to be more aware of that and examine it and search for, well, why am I thinking like this? What's going on? To be more observant of what's actually going on in your mind. That is meditation. That's developing self-awareness. That's self-understanding, seeing what's going on in your mind rather than trying to make some exotic experience occur um, in the context of some outlandish belief structure that goes with it. And there's any number of those. Now, that therapeutic stage can last for a very long time, but eventually it comes to an end. There's uh, only a couple of requirements. The first one is to understand the mechanism by which that understanding will occur, and it's deal with the symptoms first, and relax, maintain mental alertness, and just notice. The the end of that is when that therapeutic phase is over. That's when real meditation actually starts. There's you develop a habit of creating the ability to notice. And once there's no overriding distress dominating fear, anxiety, anger, whatever, recrimination, personal history, once you've sort of reconciled all that within yourself, then begins the process of, so what's going on in me? What is happening in my mind? And you become much more alive to the internal action of your mind. Just because you now, after lengthy practice, you have become habitually relaxed and habitually tuned in. You remain alert. You're not distracted and you're not you know, dull. You're actually quite vibrantly, consciously aware. And you start to develop a skill in noticing more clearly, more vividly, just what life is for you. And with that, there's this opportunity to emerge out of this adolescent or infantile psychology and connect more vividly with life itself, be more um, mentally and physically present for your existence. That's meditation. There's no belief structure involved. There's no philosophy involved. It's a state of being that you can work towards emerging from the turmoil that might be the condition you're in at the moment, with no requirement to believe anything. Everything is up for observation and testing and consideration and contemplation. There's no need to compensate yourself for anything. There's no need to indulge and go seeking something to make you feel good, because you don't feel bad about anything. Now that's the benefit of a sane and rational meditation process. And there's an end result. As you really get into it, you start to understand that you're living in this incredible mystery. Life, incredibly mysterious. And there's a recognition that you're never going to understand it. It's so immense. And that's what makes life, that becomes deeply satisfying. You, in this incredible mystery, which you are slowly developing capacity to be aware of and consciously experience, devoid of all these delusional states. And you now find, well, it's so huge, it's so big, you're never going to understand it. Well, that's a deeply satisfying state to be in. And you, along with that, everything is real as you are. You no longer have this infantile, childlike self-centeredness, because you've developed this capacity for allowing your curiosity to do its thing. So there are a lot of things I could have rattled on about, but if you take that approach, you'll find out those things for yourself. There are three major drivers that I could talk about psychologically. We've got the instinct for survival and the fear of death that goes with that. We've got the sex drive, which is all the traditions are so frightened of the sex drive. The problem isn't the sex drive, it's natural. Whatever your orientation is, it's perfectly natural. The problem is to find the appropriate expression of that sex drive, one in which you enter into intimate relations with no prospect of abusive, deceptive, manipulative, destructive, self-centered behaviour that's hurtful to others. Finding the appropriate expression of these things. Now, I could offer my thoughts on that, but if you take this approach, you're going to encounter that for yourself and you think about it and you come to your own conclusions. The final one is curiosity. And when curiosity is the most natural thing, just the desire to know, to, to, to experience, to inquire into. This is a blameless motivation. It doesn't have to have an agenda. It just is. And it's part of what we are as humans. And it's part of what tends to be the first thing which gets ditched and oppressed in a troubled state of mind. Yeah. This is meditation as I understand it. Now, I'm sure everybody's got their own views. I'm just putting forward mine. So I want to end this by just saying, if you've made it this far into the video, well, thank you for paying attention, to giving me your time. Thank you for listening to me. And hopefully, I've offered you something which has been interesting and is useful to you. So with that, see you later.